Good evening and welcome. It's really good to see so many new faces in our studio and also some faces of some of our returning friends as well. My name is Jasmine White. I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO of Montgomery Community Media, also known as MCM. MCM is proud to be a training ground for the next generation of journalists, content creators, and other multimedia career fields, and a trusted source of reliable local news and information for Montgomery County. We amplify community voices, foster civic engagement, and strengthen the fabric of Montgomery County by making media accessible, relevant, and impactful. We are extremely proud and grateful for the opportunity to support the residents, nonprofits, and business community of Montgomery County. I know you are all eager to jump into the conversation planned this evening and hear from county executive candidates, but before I leave you, I have an assignment for all of you, and that includes some of our new friends and our familiar friends. It's a part 2 assignment, but don't worry, you don't have to write anything down. So raise your hands if you have a cell phone. Awesome. So I am expecting 100% participation for this assignment. So it's a 2-part assignment. The first part of the assignment is to follow MCM on socials and to sign up for our daily digital newsletter. We have a small but mighty and talented team of reporters working diligently every day to tell the hyperlocal stories of Montgomery County. So part 1, we've got that under control. Part 2, please find a way to support independent, nonpartisan journalism in media in some way. I'll spare you all from me pontificating about the importance of free speech and freedom of the press in a healthy democracy, but I will say the spread of misinformation online and fake news erodes public trust in all media institutions and within our government. So please find a way to support the work of local, ethical, independent journalism. Okay, so that's the assignment. And the next time I see all of you, there's going to be a pop quiz, and I'm going to follow up to make sure that everybody did their homework. Again, thank you for joining us here in our studios this evening, and without further ado, please welcome William Roberts, Esquire, the Board of Directors Chair of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for having us in your house here at MCM. Good evening, everyone. I'm William Roberts, proud to be the board chair for the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. The Renters Alliance, if you don't know, is the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, advocacy, and education. We'd like to thank, once again, Montgomery Community Media for co-sponsoring tonight's Democratic County Executive Candidates Forum. You should know that eligible candidates for tonight's forum were those who had either received public campaign matching funds from the public financing system or who had raised at least $250,000 in campaign donations. And so before I introduce our candidates tonight, I want to let you know that unfortunately, Councilmember Evan Glass, who's a candidate for county executive, is unable to be with us tonight due to an illness, and we hope he gets better soon. But I do want to welcome and thank District 1 Councilmember Andrew Friedson, as well as at-large Councilmember and Council Vice President Will Jawando for being with us this evening. Thank you for being with us, gentlemen. So the first half of our program tonight will be questions from a panel of phenomenal, intrepid reporters. After a short break, we will have questions from the public. I want you to know that all questions should be directed to both of our candidates. Candidates will have about 2 minutes to respond to questions, and I'll allow about a minute for rebuttals, but we have a little bit of time, although don't push it, gentlemen. So let me introduce first our panel of reporters. We have Josh Kurtz from Maryland Matters, Julie Rassicott from Bethesda Today, Suzanne Pollack from MCM, Jenny Bixby from the Baltimore Banner, Montgomery County. So welcome all. So with that, we're going to dive in, and we'll start in alphabetical order. So Mr. Friedson, you'll go first. To allow candidates a minute to introduce yourselves, give an opening statement, and then we will go to questions from our reporter panel.
Well, thank you. Good evening. Thank you to MCM. Thank you to the Renters Alliance. Thank you to our intrepid reporters for being here tonight to talk about the future of Montgomery County. I'm Andrew Friedson. I'm serving in my second term on the County Council. I have the privilege of joining Will Giwando on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee that I chair. And I have led on housing issues from the time I joined the council. It is the reason why I joined the council. It's the reason why I decided to leave my state job doing fiscal and economic policy work to represent the only place I've ever called home in Montgomery County, because we face challenges in housing and in an economy that isn't growing. Last year, even before the Trump assault on our region and on our community, on our federal workforce, home prices were up 11.2%. Wages at the same time were only up 1.7%. It is completely unsustainable. And the only way we're going to solve these challenges is by bringing everybody together to address them. That's what I've spent my time on the council doing. I could sit here and talk about many of the affordable housing and housing changes that we have been able to make. We've made historic progress in many areas, and yet there is so much more work to be done. I want to highlight just one. Several years ago, we identified an opportunity to create what's now called the Housing Production Fund. That is the first example of a social housing program on the broad scale through Housing Opportunities Commission. It has been highlighted in the New York Times. It has become a national model all over the country. It is helping us to produce thousands of units, 6,000 units in a revolving loan fund. It's just one example of how we can bring together the private sector with government and residents to be able to solve our challenges. I look forward to being the next county executive so I can continue on that work and do it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friesen. Mr. Giwando.
Thank you.
A little bit more than a minute, for sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good watching and here. Thank you to the reporters. Thank you to MCM and to the Renters Alliance for pulling this together. This is a really, really important conversation. I know what it's like to be a low-income renter, moving from place to place, looking for safe, affordable, habitable housing. I know what it's like to worry about my mom's paycheck not being able to support the rent. I know that 35% of our residents who are renters today, many housing burdened, spending 30, 40, 50, 60% or more of their monthly income on housing. It's not fair, it's not right, and we have to do something about it. It's why when I got on the council, I immediately passed a bill that required relocation expenses when a rental unit is deemed inhabitable by our Department of Housing. It's why during COVID, I passed emergency legislation to freeze rents and to prevent evictions, keeping thousands of people in their homes during the worst pandemic in 100 years. It's why just a couple of years ago, I co-authored and led a bill to pass rent stabilization in this county that has kept thousands of people in their homes to not be priced out like me and my mom were when I was a kid. I know what it means to be looking at that floor and seeing roaches and mice and not knowing what to do about it. It's not right, it's not fair. And I know what it means to stand up to the big developers who put profit over people, not all of them, but enough to impact tens of thousands of residents. And we have to work with everybody, absolutely, but we have to make sure it's a good deal for residents. We have to strike that deal. So I would ask you tonight, go to willgiwando.com/renters, read my plan, read my record, and endorse it and sign up, because we're going to have to build a movement to empower renters in this county. That's the only way they're going to have an equal footing. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll now turn to our reporters. Josh, you're up first.
Thank you. You mentioned rent stabilization, and let's talk about it now. In 2023, the county adopted a rent stabilization law that by and large caps annual rents for most apartments at 6% annual rent increases, though there are certain provisions that enable landlords to collect more from their tenants, and it exempts certain properties from the rent caps. The law was the product of a compromise. Councilmember Giwando, who was the sponsor of one of the bills, and Councilmember Glass, who isn't here, voted for it, while Councilmember Friedson voted against it. The law's been in effect for about 15 months now. Can you each explain your vote and tell us how you think the law is working so far? And are there other measures the county could be taking up to ensure rents don't skyrocket?
I'm going to start with you, Councilmember Joanna.
Sure. Yes, very proud of the bill that we passed. It was a compromise. It was not the bill I introduced that passed. There's a 23-year exemption for new construction. That means your rent can be raised any amount for 23 years. If you don't raise it to the full 6%, if you do 3%, the next year you can bank that other 3% and add it on to the 6%. That's a big raise. Our Department of Housing and Community Affairs considers 10% to be constructive eviction, the same as evicting somebody, a 10% increase in 1 year. The average rent increase in Montgomery County over the last 30 years, 2 to 3%. So the idea that this is impacting profitability, not true at all. Is it impacting people's wanting to charge more than that? Absolutely, but not profitability. One of the things I'm most proud of, we saw almost a 70% reduction in houses and rental units that were on the troubled properties list. That means they're not habitable. They have serious problems like roaches and mice and mold over and over again. In 1 year, we saw a 70% decrease. The reason is because we tied rent increases to, if you're on that list, you can't increase rent. And people, what they did is they hired people to come in and fix things and improve the habitability for thousands of residents. It's one of the many things why this law is working. It's not perfect, it was a compromise, but it absolutely can exist. To your last point, we need to produce more housing. I'm a big proponent. You can produce housing, you can preserve existing affordable housing, and you can protect renters. And you can do all three at the same time. Don't buy into the false choice that you have to do one or the other. You can do both. People can make a profit, and you can keep people safe and housed. And that's what we're going to do as county executive.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thanks for the question. This is a really important question. And when we talk about the issue of why renters don't have the level of power that they should, it's fundamentally because landlords control a scarce resource, a desperately needed scarce resource, and we don't have enough housing. So any policy that we put in place that is going to reduce the amount of housing that we have and fail to meet the needs that we have in housing is not going to solve the problem. It's going to worsen the problem. And unfortunately, that's what rent stabilization has done. If you look at the last 15-month period, multifamily rental housing has screeched to a halt. And there are some who say, well, that's only because of the economy, or that's only because of construction costs or tariffs. And that's just not true. Because if you look at other regional counterparts that we have in Northern Virginia and in DC, they don't face the same challenges that we have. There are a number of provisions in the rent stabilization law that are particularly concerning, that have caused major challenges with the willingness of housing providers to invest in building more housing. One is the 23-year exemption that you heard instead of a date certain period, which is very difficult to finance a property. Very difficult. That's just the reality of it. These aren't local developers making choices. These are institutional investors like state pension funds for teachers and other institutional investors that are choosing where to invest their money. They're not choosing even between one property or another property in our region or our community. They're choosing between investments all around the country. That's number one. Number two, on the vacancy control dynamic, that is a protection of a unit as opposed to a protection of a person. And that causes serious issues, particularly for naturally occurring affordable housing. We see what happens when we go too far on policies like this. It prevents progress that we need to build more housing. It also makes multifamily rental housing happen with greater irregularity, and it moves those multifamily properties, those rental properties, into for sale product. And that's what we're seeing. Luxury townhomes at well over $1 million, $1.5 million, are replacing what would have been and could have been multifamily housing. Those are units that we can't subsidize. Those are opportunities that we have missed and we have lost forever. So there is a way to do this. There's a way to move forward. There's a way to address our housing challenges, but it works by bringing people together, not by imposing restrictions that have more unintended consequences and create more problems than they solve.
I think you wanted to rebuttal.
Yeah, please. Sure. So here's a big difference between the two of us and really all three candidates even, I hope, and I wish my colleague, Councilmember Glass, well. Everyone in the transaction, whether it's BlackRock, the pension fund, you're talking about billionaires and millionaires who are investing and saying, I need 20% return to build something and charge you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month for a studio one bed. The system we have is completely broken. It's an absolute joke that rent stabilization is getting in the way of those exorbitant profits. We have to change the whole conversation. $50. I met with a mom who was living in a 1-bedroom with a 13-year-old son in Briggs Cheney because they had to move from her 2-bedroom in the same complex because a $50 rent increase was going to kick them out of that apartment. And she didn't want him to have to move schools because he was doing well. You're balancing that, and that's a good story. She was able to stay in the apartment even though they're sleeping in the same bed as a 13-year-old, which I know my 13-year-old wouldn't want to do, against someone making crazy profits. And the idea that you have to choose between both is not true. We have a project in White Oak that's going to have 5,000 new units, 9,000 jobs, and they're going to be under rent stabilization. And when asked in the Washington Business Journal, that developer, why are you still doing this? He said, because we think it's profitable, we can do well even in this environment. We need to get new people into it, and that's what happens. They try to punish you in the short term, Josh, to say we're going to do a capital strike and in the short term, and then 3 quarters, and then come back and say, see, look, no one's building anything. But when you look over the long term, and studies confirm this, people come back into the market and you get new developers into the market. So don't be scared that, oh, there's nothing we can do, and this is what the profits have to be, and it's the system we have. I believe we can create a different system.
Councilmember Friedson, you wanted to?
In the process of creating a different system, we are not building housing right now. That is not happening in Montgomery County. The only housing that is being built is subsidized by the government. And I am all for subsidizing affordable housing. Nobody has done more on affordable housing programs and funding programs to accelerate the amount of affordable housing than I have over the last 7 years on the council. And Councilmember Jawando and I have worked together on many of these efforts. In fact, 2 of the 3 items that he mentioned, I voted in favor of, and he supported some of the things that I'm going to talk about. There isn't a lot of disagreement on that, but there is a fundamental disagreement here that we can completely change the system and that we can afford, while rents are stabilized, while this restriction is in place and no housing is being built, that we can afford over the long term to wait for a new system to come in place. We're not going to be able to create a new international financial market in Montgomery County alone. And if people aren't willing to invest here, if people don't believe that we are an interested partner that understand how financing works, how business works, how problems get solved, then we are never going to address these issues. And the 11.2% challenge is going to get worse, not easier. And I don't believe that the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 rents and people who can afford that need the same level of protection that people in a studio apartment in naturally occurring affordable housing. That's what the policy is in place right now. It's not the right approach to this problem.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Julie.
Okay, so this has already been referenced a little bit, but a recent Montgomery planning pipeline analysis, which I think you just spoke a little bit about, found that developers cite a number of barriers to moving ahead with projects that are already in the pipeline. And one is the rent stabilization, high interest rates, which you mentioned, high construction costs, and also, which seems to be something that this county has had a problem with for a very long time, a lengthy approval and permitting process. So I would like to hear from you, since we discussed some of these other issues already, what can be done to to make the process more friendly to builders and get these things moving along so we get more housing built?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we are sending the message that we want you to do business in Montgomery County. And too often we have heard from people in the highest elected offices, council and executive, that we are not particularly interested in those who want to do investments in Montgomery County. And that is just not going to solve the problem. In terms of actually fixing the permitting process and actually fixing the regulatory review process, I've worked on this issue and I want to work more on this issue. And as county executive, I'd be in a position to do that. We've passed 3 zoning text amendments that have dramatically reduced the regulatory process. One for large biohealth facilities, one for office to residential conversion, and one for multifamily affordable housing, mixed income communities. We reduced the time it takes by 75%. The good news and bad news there is good news, we reduced the regulatory burden by 75% as part of the process without eliminating a single public benefit that exists. The bad news is there was 75% to reduce. And some of the ways that we did that were we allowed the processes, instead of being consecutive back to back and extend the time period, we compressed them so that they could be consecutive, concurrent and happen at the same time. We said that any department, executive department or park and planning, silence is acceptance. So if the government doesn't bother to respond, then they're accepting your approval, forcing the government to actually respond. That we can't sit on applications because we have an urgent housing need and we need to solve these issues, and we compress the time period. We can do things like that. We can leverage technology. We can set a culture within the Department of Permitting Services and our other executive agencies to be able to move this forward, but we need the executive leadership focused on that to be able to make it happen.
I would agree that there's absolutely progress that needs to be made on making the permitting process, the approval process smoother. And this is one thing, I think all the things that my colleague talked about, I think we voted the same way probably on all of them. Just that's an agreement. I think there's a lot of agreement there. Shortening the time window, if the state requires it, the county doesn't have to require it. Having a permitting director whose whole job is to have a yes and a how do we help you kind of mindset, not how do we slow you down. And I think that applies to many areas, not just building housing, but small businesses, if you're building a pool at your house, go down the list. And I think we need to have more of a customer service approach. And I think as executive, that's something I can definitely focus on. We also have to highlight our successes and opportunities and have a plan. One of the things I like that has happened in some other jurisdictions is you say, okay, here, the executive says, here's our goal. I want to do this. We want to produce these units. Let's get everyone in the room and talk about how we do it. Everyone, including renters, including developers, including folks that want to invest. The great thing that we have is I've worked in a lot of places. I used to work for Sherrod Brown Center from Ohio. Like, we're not Akron, and it's a great place, but we're Montgomery County. People want to be here, and people want to build and invest here. And so I think there's great leverage that we have in that regard. And yes, we can make it quicker and make it easier without compromising health or safety. And I think we've done that. We've passed a lot of expedited timeline reviews, but there's more to do in that regard, for sure.
There's a lot of agreement here, but we'll offer up in case there's any rebuttal needs to happen, or if not.
Yeah, I will say the data
dangerous. I know.
The data does not reflect that people want to build here right now. That's just an undeniable fact. Right now, permits have screeched to a halt. People are not investing in building housing in Montgomery County. Now, you heard earlier a difference of opinion there of this is the temporary pain in order for long-term gain. That's a philosophy. It's not the one that I have. I think that we need to be building lots more housing. We need to be building it yesterday, if not today, and we are going to need tens of thousands of more units in order to level the playing field so that there are more housing options and more housing opportunities for the people who need it, where and when they need it. And unfortunately, right now, the data does not reflect that Montgomery County is a place where people want to invest to build housing, and we've got to change that. And the next county executive needs to be focused on that. And if I am lucky enough to be in that role, that is absolutely going to be the thing that I'm focused on.
Thank you, Councilman.
Yeah, it's not an either or, and I think that's the fundamental difference here. The word philosophy was mentioned. My colleague in committee has said the luxury housing of today is the natural occurring affordable housing of tomorrow. I think that's an exact quote. You can look at the record. Totally false. I lived in Georgian Towers 25 years ago when I was in law school, or 20 years ago, sorry. 25 was high school. 20 years ago was law school. I proposed to my wife in that building. It's now called the Arrive. It's right on Georgia Avenue. It was luxury housing 20 years ago, charging the highest rents for people. It's changed ownership a couple times, changed names. It's been 20 years, and it's still luxury housing. They've changed a couple fixtures. You have to be intentional about that affordable housing that you have to produce. And the government has to play a role. It's not enough to just build more market housing. If that was the case, that problem would be solved here. The other thing I'll say is it's not true. You can't take 3/4 of data, not even a full year, and say no one's building here. There's a project under rent stabilization that's going to produce 5,000 units in White Oak. Market rate, only 12.5% affordable. We're going to help them a little bit, expedite it, and use a TIF to help build the infrastructure because there's no roads. But And that's a good thing. But you have to reject this premise that it's trickle-down economics or nothing. That has not worked.
Yeah, can I just, there's a specific citing of my words, and there's a specific citing of a particular project. That project in White Oak, which I support, is requiring about $400 million in subsidies to make happen. Now, I believe investing in White Oak matters. I believe the East County has had chronic levels of disinvestment, and it is worth it for us to leverage our public dollars to do it. But the idea that the market alone is doing that is just not accurate. County government is stepping in with an unprecedented level of public support in order to make that happen, number one. Number two, on the question of the housing that we build today becoming the naturally occurring affordable housing of tomorrow, that is what it is. If you build housing today that is not subsidized, it will not be affordable. That's the point. It will be market rate. And after 20, 30, 40 years, it will catch up, and that's what naturally occurring affordable housing is.
Thank you so much. Suzanne, we're going to move to you, but to be fair, I got to give Councilmember Jawan just one more word.
I'll be 30 seconds.
This will be the only two round. I see the mistake that I made.
I appreciate that. What I would say is that the White Oak project is not a $400 million investment. We're letting them borrow against future property tax revenue to build the infrastructure, the roads and the pipes. So, if they don't meet it, they don't get it. If it doesn't produce enough to cover it, so it's not coming out of your pocket. It's against future property tax revenue, and it's going to be 5,000 unit, 9,000 jobs. That's a good trade. That's a good incentive, as opposed to a pilot where you say you don't have to pay property taxes at all for 20 years, even if you need it or not. And that's a bill he supported and I didn't support. I think we have to be strategic about using incentives to get the type of housing where we want it, and that's the main difference here.
Thank you so much. Suzanne, you've been very patient. Appreciate you. Good.
No problem. Under Thrive Montgomery 2050, the county is seeking to diversify housing, adding different kinds of multi-unit structures in certain areas. The people I've spoken with, especially those that live in the University Boulevard corridor, are fearing that the developers are going to come in and offer them great prices, they'll move out and have no place else to go in the county. How can you reassure these people that they're going to be able to live in Montgomery County when with these and the condos won't make prices even higher?
We'll start with Councilmember Jawan.
Oh, okay. I would say on that issue, the concerns, some of them are valid, right? If you rezone an area to say you can not have one house, you can have an apartment here or whatever, your property values will go up. And one of the reasons I wasn't supportive of one of the aspects of the corridor zoning approach was because on the corridors, we have data that those are the most affordable places to live. If you think about who lives on Georgia Avenue in Aspen Hill or Randolph Road in Silver Spring, on the front street, those are low-income renters who are renting houses from other people who don't want to live on the front street, or they're low-income homeowners or middle-class homeowners. And when you inflate those property values, you're going to create great pressure for people to be displaced, and that's a problem in a targeted way. Now, if you can spread it across the county and do a little more, zoning changes have a role to play, but you have to be really in tune with what's the infrastructure, what's the plan for affordability, school capacity, water and sewer, and all that. And I think some of the concerns that people have with Thrive, even though it's a good general plan, and I did support it, it's in the details playing out in the University Corridor where you're saying you're going to build these on our main street, and we have no additional transit. And parking and all that stuff is not here, and all those questions weren't answered. And so I think we have to do a better job of really digging into that, and I don't think that was done in the cases that you're talking about.
Well, there's two questions here. One is about the University Boulevard Corridor Plan. The other is about the Corridor ZTA. I'll just say about the Corridor ZTA, I was proud to have worked together with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez to put that forward, where we listened to concerns that folks had and we made progress. The most significant workforce housing proposal that we have ever put forward in the county. We provided more housing options and opportunities along the major thoroughfares, and it's absolutely consistent with Thrive 2050, which we all voted for. And we all said that we were going to support. We can't sit here and focus on every reason why housing shouldn't be built. Because if we do that and exclusively focus on that, we will never build the housing that we need to actually solve this problem. To me, there is no greater issue than focusing on perfection and letting that be the enemy of progress. And part of this process started with Councilmember Giwando's original zoning text amendment, which looked at creating lots of opportunities to build lots more even than we allowed in this zoning text amendment, with fewer units in this zoning text amendment that were even able to be built in that original proposal. That proposal was by right. Anybody could have built whatever they wanted without any process whatsoever. Our process has a review process that allows for public input. We have workforce housing requirements as part of it. There was no affordability standard originally. So we made some major concessions and major compromise, try to find the balance between how do you move forward, how do you make progress, how do you address the housing options that people don't have and desperately want and need, with the fact that we could sit here and explain 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't build housing, and we will never build it. And then we will end up with the housing crisis that we currently are in and will continue to be in. On University Boulevard, we're working our way through those issues, and we're going to figure out how to come to a resolution and how do we balance the long-term goals and needs that we have with the near-term and immediate challenges that we face. And interestingly, some of the biggest concerns that we hear on University Boulevard are related to the transportation recommendations, even more so than the housing recommendations, although we're going to address both as we take up these issues.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson. Mr. Giwando, you wanted to
Yeah,
rebuttal?
just sure, briefly. I think just, again, big difference here is you have to reject the zero-sum game. You're hearing a lot, it's either we're going to build housing this way or we're going to not build any housing. Not true. We are the guarders of public funds, and we have to protect the public interest. No one else is concerned about that, elected to be concerned about that. So we have to look at affordability. We have to look at traffic, infrastructure, schools. You know, some developers care more than others, but that's not their job. Their job is to come in and build. It's our job to be a check on that. That's our job. And to say that we have to just open the store, the prevailing wisdom now, the reason that developers are the #1 contributors to campaigns and have the loudest voice in the room is because they're driving the conversation. And if that were producing housing and we were all doing great, maybe I'd be okay with it, but it's not. Those renters I talked about at the beginning, my experience growing up here, it's not working. And folks are making a ton of money, so we have to check it. And we have to make sure that the rules work. That doesn't mean build no housing. I want to build more housing. You have to produce it and protect. Don't buy into the false choice that if you put any sort of protection that you're stopping housing. It's just not true.
Councilmember Friedson, you wanted to rebuttal?
On the zoning changes that we agreed to, that was a compromise. That was a way to figure out how do you address all the issues that Councilmember Giwando talked about, all the issues that came up. We came up with an approach to address it. Now, you can say I'm opposed to it. You got to have a plan. You got to have an alternative. You got to have something else that you're putting forward to address. It can't just be pause and do nothing, because pausing and doing nothing to address housing is not an appropriate response. When you talk about developers on the zoning changes, the developers I heard from, the for-profit, large-scale developers, were opposed to the zoning changes because they impacted their single-family neighborhoods. Those are the folks that I heard from who are mad at me, who are yelling at me, some of whom are, holding up signs and putting out lawn signs with my name on it, saying that they don't like the zoning changes in their neighborhood and their community. And we've seen what that can turn into in housing when we allow a veto of all new housing projects and process. The people who were fighting for it, the people who were pushing for it, the people who wanted those zoning changes were the nonprofit affordable housing advocates. The people who are actually doing the work. When we sat down and we were figuring this out, and we wanted to take a step back and learn what can we do to address the concerns that people have while also making progress. And it was clear from all the affordable housing providers, the corridors are the place where the most impact would happen. It's most consistent with our growth plan that we approved. That's the way that we make progress, by bringing people together and by figuring out to solve problems.
Thank you so much. Jenny?
Hi. Good evening. You both have already addressed several of the housing policies that the council has looked at in recent years. And when I've talked as a reporter to people in the community who are concerned about housing affordability here, you see a lot of people agree that there is a crisis, but they all want different things. Some folks, want to be able to afford their rent. Some people are looking for a path to home ownership. So my question for both of you is, how do you think policy-wise is the best way forward to strike the right balance between supporting renters and making sure that rent is affordable while also supporting home ownership opportunities for people who want to own their own home.
Start, Councilmember Friedson.
Well, we tried to strike that balance, and I think we did a pretty good job in the More Housing Now proposal. We included the zoning text amendment, as we talked about earlier, that allowed for more housing opportunities and options along the corridors, where, by the way, people who own their own home get an additional option for what they do with the home that they own. That's what it allows. That's the option that is being provided. We included a provision of it that dealt with conversions of vacant office into housing, because we heard repeatedly, what about all these vacant properties? What about these office buildings that are a scourge in our communities? How do we make those part of the solution to the housing problems that we face? And so we included that in the package. And we included additional funding for pathways to home ownership, some of which we were able to get through in the budget, some of which we got to come back for and get more funding for to help more residents afford home ownership opportunities. It's an and, not an or option. I agree with that, but you have to have a proposal to put forward, and you can't be opposed to the only proposal that has been put forward, and I'm not even sure if we're still supportive of our own plan. So the key here is to make sure that we are providing pathways to home ownership for residents, helping residents who do own their homes to stay in their homes, not killing senior property tax credits that help residents stay in their home, and to helping those who want to rent. 40% of the county right now rents. Some rent by choice. Some rent by necessity. We should be supporting both. And we can provide lots of ways, and we have provided lots of ways to do that. And then we can get creative with public land, like we have done with the Randolph Road project, the old rec center site, where we're building home ownership opportunities, we're building rent opportunities on public land. We can solve these problems, but we have to do it by doing things, by bringing people together to get things done, not by saying no, and not by pausing, and not by obstructing.
Councilmember Jawanda.
Again, you're hearing the same zero-sum game here, which is just not true. But yes, we can do things. Before there was More Housing Now, there was More Housing for More People. Councilmember Jawanda introduced in 2020, which included two proposals: rent stabilization near metro stations. So we have 8 in the county, and a zoning change to allow for more missing middle housing near those same metro stations, where it's most likely that you can have density and people are actually going to walk, and you're not going to impact the infrastructure things as badly. We passed the rent stabilization a couple years ago. The zoning change, as was mentioned, was much smaller and much more targeted towards displacement, unfortunately, than I would like. But zoning has a role to play. It's not a panacea. The other thing we need to do, different types of materials. Can we look at using prefab housing? That's something that's happening in other parts of the country. Can we look at communities that are for teachers and public service workers where they're subsidized? Other things happening in the country. The Housing Production Fund, which we initiated in the previous council and all supported. The reason it works is because it only requires a 5% return to replenish the $100 million loan. That's why you're able to provide half the units at a 40 or 50% of AMI at affordable levels. We also need to make sure that we're protecting renters and using things like TIFs and pilots. Here's another thing you got to parse through. The bill that was mentioned around conversions, of course, like if there's a old office building that's not being used, let's convert it. Yeah, that's great. But not everyone needs 100% for 20 years, to pay no property tax for 20 years. What I said is I offered an amendment to that bill. Let's do what DC did. Let's set a cap at how much we're going to spend, and let's say we can do up to 100%, and you might only need 30% for 10 years, and you can get the project done. That money is coming from our schools, it's coming from our libraries, it's coming from things that we need to spend it on. And so again, reject this premise that you can do some of that stuff, but you can't give away the store. And when everyone thinks it's a crisis, which they do, the human reaction is to say, we just got to give away the store. But we have to do it in a smart, educated way that protects the taxpayer.
On the office conversion, just to be very clear, our own analysts on the county council showed that the revenue generated from those projects generated more revenue to the taxpayers, to the county, for schools, for roads, for all of the public services that we need, than was being foregone. So this idea that it's taking money away is just not accurate. And it is a way to solve a problem that we are hearing everywhere of what about all these vacant properties? What about this mall property? What about that office property to be able to address the problem? And I do take a little bit of umbrage with the idea that we initiated the Housing Production Fund, because we didn't initiate the Housing Production Fund, respectfully. I worked with Hans Riemer on making the Housing Production Fund happen. Yes, Councilmember Jonda was part of the conversations in committee and voted for it, but to say that we initiated that is not accurate. And the important thing here is actually that wasn't my idea, and it wasn't Hans Riemer's idea. It was a developer's idea. It came from the private sector. It came from us listening to the people who actually do this work every day to say, you know what, if government does what they do best, and if the private sector does what they do best, we could do some really special things here. And that's why that is happening. That's why it is a national model for how to address these issues. And that's how we're going to solve these problems. The same thing with the Nonprofit Preservation Fund. We didn't initiate that. I initiated that, working originally with Hans Riemer. Eventually, we were able to get it across the finish line. Not originally my idea, and I didn't make it happen. I made it happen by convening and getting everybody in the room, and for 3 years we worked on this issue, for 3 years. And finally we came up with a solution. And now thousands of units, 4,500 units, about half of the at-risk, naturally occurring affordable housing units are going to be able to be preserved. The most significant preservation effort anywhere in the region, maybe anywhere in the country, is happening. And it's happening in some of the highest rent areas of the county where we're preserving affordable housing, including in Bethesda, because of the Nonprofit Preservation Fund. That only happens by working together with the nonprofit housing community, with our for-profit developers. Instead of saying, we don't want your money here, we don't want your investments here, we're going to make rules whether you like them or not, and we'll wait and create a new system. By working together with people, we can actually solve these issues and address these challenges and actually produce the housing that people desperately want and people desperately need.
Thank you, Councilmember Friesen. Councilmember Girondo,
Sure, yes. It was actually Stacy Spann, the former HOC director, who started the pre-project that led to the Housing Preservation Fund. But either way, I'm not here to play the credit. We voted for it. It's a good idea. I'm glad it's working. We need to invest more into it. But I think you're hearing a theme here. Just get the developers, ask them what they want to do, and it'll all work out. Tell me where in the world that's happening. Just go across the country. No matter different types of community, where is that working out? Yes, they're a partner. Of course they're a partner. You need to work with everybody. But they have an outsized voice. And they want us to make a decision with hands tied behind our back. One of my first times on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, then the Fed Committee, I asked the developer, I said, well, can we make it a little higher affordability here if we're going to give you this public land? And they said, absolutely not. It would blow up the deal, won't work. 2 days later, they came back and said, never mind, actually, we can do it. Negotiation 101. They're holding the cards. My job is to protect you and protect your money. When people are struggling and getting kicked out of their homes and evictions are up, we don't have time to say, just let them bring the ideas and we'll get in a room. We got to change the way things are operating. Now, I believe we can. I believe the data supports that we can. That's what I'm going to do as county executive.
So we've got some time. Thank you both, gentlemen. We've got some time for a second round, and so if you all have another hot question in the chamber, maybe we'll go in reverse. Jenny, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm happy to come back. Or how about this? If there's someone who has a second question.
I do have a second question,
okay,
but I might speak a little off the cusp here. I was going to pull up, as a point of personal privilege, the banner did put together a poll when we launched, learning from folks in the community about what they liked and did not like as much about Montgomery County. And the common theme was people thought it was too expensive to live here. I know, shocker. But we also heard from a lot of folks that really said that they love how diverse it is here. And I know that both of you have been very involved in supporting that the county is a progressive place and a safe space for people of different marginalized groups. And something that's interesting to me in my reporting is I speak to a lot of advocates who are not in the housing space but work maybe in LGBTQ rights or immigrant rights, and they're struggling with, there's people who want to come to Montgomery County because they think they'll be safer here, but they've heard it's expensive and they don't know how to get housing that's safe and affordable, and all things we're already talking about. But I guess, what would you say to someone who tomorrow is coming to Montgomery County, doesn't know what they're going to do? How would you want to welcome that person and make sure that they're safe, but also can actually physically live here.
And can I, Councilmember Jawanda, we'll start with you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, that's the challenge. I mean, one of the things your poll illuminated, that a Washington Post poll illuminated, I think almost a year or 9 months earlier, the number one issue is affordability, and particularly housing affordability. And there's great opportunity in that, because whether you're a senior trying to stay in your home or a young family trying to move in or somewhere in between, it's hitting everybody, whether you're high income, low income. And so it creates an opportunity to do something. But we got to be careful that we don't just say, well, we just got to give away everything we've got to get it done. We have to convene people, absolutely. What I would tell that young person or that family, we want you here. We're a welcoming community. I'm so proud to live in Montgomery County at a time when other communities are going under different changes across the country for the top 10 most diverse cities in the country. I would say, look, we've got a strong economy here. We've got a strong school system. We've got the best community college in the country. What are you interested in? Where can we help get you on a pathway to a career or job? And then, the affordability issue, that's not something we can change overnight. I do think we have to do more on temporary rental assistance for people who need it. But it's really prohibitive to come in here and be a first-time person to live here. And so, yes, the 3 Ps matter. Build more housing, for sure, produce, preserve existing affordable, not displacing people who are already here, and protecting renters. And that's what we're going to do. If I can tell someone, if you rent something, I promise you it won't go up more than 3% plus inflation, capped at 6%. That's going to give someone some peace of mind. Otherwise, before this bill, it could go up 20% and you're out in 1 year. So we got to make sure we provide that kind of assurance to folks too.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawanda. Councilmember Friedson.
Well, first of all, I would sell all the great things of Montgomery County. Grew up here, lived here all my life, the only place I've ever called home, something that we share. I believe in Montgomery County, but I believe in Montgomery County so much that I believe we can do so much better than what we're doing right now. And the data on the economic growth, on the wage growth, on housing is just not meeting the vision that we have, the view that we have, the values that we have in Montgomery County. All the values that you talked about, the inclusive nature that we have, we believe in that. And I believe Montgomery County can be a light in a dark moment as all of the terrible things are happening at the federal level. But a place like Montgomery County that isn't affordable isn't sustainable. And we have to address that. And we can't tell somebody that we're a place that is welcoming to everybody and we have the values of being an inclusive and welcoming community, but then be against changing to housing opportunities, saying that we should have choices for housing. You can't be against housing proposals and then say that you want to be a welcoming and inclusive community. It just doesn't work in that way. We're never going to solve the problem for that person who wants to come here for the values that we have if we don't have an affordable place for that person to live. We need an affordable option as a rental unit, and we need an affordable option, hopefully, for a home ownership opportunity. And if you look at the data, we are losing middle-income residents. 26,000 middle-income residents on net have left because of the high housing prices and because of the fact that our wages and jobs are not keeping pace. The next county executive is going to have to tackle this issue head on. The next county executive is going to have to get private investment in Montgomery County, not the jobs can go to Frederick, not look at Northern Virginia and how badly they're beating us, but somebody who actually can convince people who make decisions on where to invest, where to employ people, that they should employ right here in Montgomery County so that that person has a good job, that can afford their housing. And then we need somebody who's going to help to build more housing, subsidize housing through the government, through all the programs that I've worked on and want to continue to build upon, and market rate housing, because I don't think we need to provide restrictions to people who can afford $10,000, $15,000 a month rent. But we do need to protect the people who need help the most, and as noted, I have supported many of those policies, nearly all of those policies. It's not an us versus them dynamic of the renters versus the developers. We're never going to solve our problem if that becomes the prevailing narrative. We are never going to build enough housing that we need. We are never going to provide the level of investment that we want in Montgomery County to grow our community and our county. We have to have the reality and the results meet the rhetoric. And that's what we need to do in order to help that person and more people to move to Montgomery County.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple things just to your question that occurred to me. I'm chair of the Education Committee. I have 4 children, and they were all under 2 at one point. or under 4. The most expensive time for a young parents 0 to 4, when you have to pay $2,000 a month per kid for high quality childcare. One of the things as part of my platform and what I want to do, and we've started the process, is make early childhood education more affordable and for everyone. If you can take that and relieve some burden there, that's a big affordability cost for a young family coming in. DC did that. We were losing people to DC, but literally because of that program. We got to continue to strengthen and invest in our school system. We didn't talk about it tonight, but in 2005, we were the top school system in the country. We're in the 70s now. We got to continue to make investments while kids with special education, low-income kids, and students speaking English as a second language continue to increase. All those kids can learn, and I have 3 kids in the public school system right now, but we have to make investments. That's another big area here of difference between me and my opponents. They voted to cut $70 million from the school system budget. Thankfully, we found a way not to do that. I voted against that. So we have to continue to make our school system strong. And the last thing I would say is we need to invest in pathways to great jobs. We have some great companies here. United Therapeutics, within the next 10 years, is going to be the company in the world that takes your lung, God forbid if you need it, and takes your own tissue and builds the lung in the Silver Spring laboratory they have right there. And imagine all the life science jobs that are going to come around that. We need to tell a better story, encourage that investment to come in, and that's how you get people to live here and be affordable.
The good news, early child care, there's universal agreement. We need universal pre-K, and we need to go beyond that so that we can be competitive with DC and so that we can provide one of the most significant affordability challenges that families face in Montgomery County. We just expanded from $3,000 to $10,000 the property tax credit. We've done a number of things, including a zoning text amendment that I did to make home-based childcare easier and better. We know that many of our new residents, immigrants in particular, want new businesses to be started in their homes, and childcare is one of the big examples of that. We made that easier and possible to happen where it otherwise couldn't happen. But the only way we're going to solve childcare, it's another example, is by working with our nonprofit and our for-profit business partners to be able to solve that. We had a process and an ability to move forward with that through Montgomery Moving Forward, a coalition of nonprofits, businesses, and government. And unfortunately, there's been a turf war between the government and what the government controls and the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And ultimately, we've gotten very little done in that regard. And that needs to change, and it can change overnight with a new county executive. I'm glad that my colleague here mentioned United Therapeutics. Nobody has done more to support United Therapeutics on the council than I have. In fact, we passed a zoning text amendment specifically to help biohealth companies like United Therapeutics in urban areas like Silver Spring to be able to expand. Their expansion, everything that was discussed earlier, is going to be possible because of that zoning text amendment, because we made it easier for them to expand, because we made it possible for them to expand. So no, we shouldn't be doing everything that any business asks us to do no matter what. I've never done that. I will never do that. Everybody will have a seat at the table, but we do need to move forward and listen to the people that we want to invest, partner with them, work with them if we actually want to grow our economy.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to try to get you all in. We have a little bit of time before our break. Suzanne, do you have another?
So far this year, 6,000 residents have gotten eviction notices, and more than 700 have been actually evicted, but the numbers are higher because when you get an eviction notice, often you just leave before the sheriff throws you out. So I was wondering, some of these tenants are saying they're being evicted because they complain too much about conditions, or because they've joined the apartment complex union, or that they are just a little behind in the rent, not totally. What can you do? I know you recently are working on a thing to give them 2 weeks notice or so between eviction, but what can you actually do to help these tenants while not chasing developers away? And then where do you stand on just cause eviction?
So, Mr. Friedson.
Yeah, there's a balance on all of these things. We need to make sure that we're providing protections for tenants, and we need to make sure that we're not doing it in a way that goes too far and creates unintended consequences. The council supported unanimously what's now good cause eviction, used to be called just cause eviction. That's going through the state process. I was part of that vote. And that's an example of something that we can do to address it. Now, the concern in Annapolis has been whether or not they're going to pass good cause or just cause eviction with policies like the rent stabilization policy that we have because of a concern of what it means for housing production. That is an ongoing challenge. So one of the reasons why we don't have good cause and just cause eviction right now is because legislators in Annapolis have specifically cited our legislation in Montgomery County and not wanting to inhibit the amount of housing that gets built that needs to be part of the solution to solve the housing problem.
Mr. Joanna.
Great question. A lot of things there. I'm going to try to go in reverse order. Good cause, just cause. People were fighting that before we even had rent stabilization. So I think, again, you got to take the long view. And all that says for the normal person watching at home is that your lease can't be ended at the end of the 1 year or 2 year lease unless there's good cause, unless you haven't paid your rent, or you can't just be kicked out. Because you remember, 40%, and I was one of these people, that's their home. Like, it's their home, it's where they live. And so you can't just tell people at the end of it that you're going. The eviction process is a real problem. There were not, the majority of the council co-sponsored the 2-week notice to give some dignity and some time. Councilman Friedson was not a co-sponsor of that bill. I think that's something we do need to pass. You asked about, what was the other issue you asked about?
I would just basically want to know how you would help.
The folks who are being evicted. So the other issue with that is we have to work with the sheriff. My office has done this a lot to make sure that when eviction notices happen, that we're not doing it in an undignified way and we're throwing people's stuff on the street. The other thing we need to do is provide more rental assistance. We did a lot during COVID with federal money. We put a lot of our own county money in too, but we have to do that, and especially at the time we're going in with 6,000 or 5,000 or more people being fired from the federal government, with all the cuts that are happening with this big ugly bill, people are going to need more support, not less. And the way this is happening, I think there's a role for the county to step up and keep people in their homes. When you keep a student in his home, he doesn't have to move to a different school. Teachers don't have to worry about that. You keep people safe. It's much more expensive when people have to self-evict or move out, like you said, which that's why the numbers are higher than that, because a lot of people are just moving preemptively.
Great, thank you very much. We're gonna, we'll skip rebuttals if you're all right with that, so we can get to Julie and Josh. Wonderful. Julie?
Okay, I'm going to return to housing options. I live in a downtown Silver Spring neighborhood, and recently a ranch home across the street from me went up for sale, and the real estate listing caused quite the kerfuffle because the agent actually put renderings of 2 small houses on the property and said, this is what you can do here, as opposed to this is the single family home, here are 70 pictures of the home. Neighbors were worried, like, oh my God, what's going to happen with the property? I know, Councilmember Friesen, you said you've had people put signs up in neighborhoods because they don't want their single family home neighborhoods to turn into places with lots of multiple housing options and possible apartment buildings going up. So I'm just wondering what can be done to win the hearts and minds of single family homeowners in neighborhoods to accept multiple types of housing.
I'm going to start with Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to be a little strict so we can get it. So.
Great. I'll try to be concise. Great question. My first home was a duplex on 11th Avenue in Long Branch, and I thought it was huge when we moved into it, because I had lived in apartments my entire life. There's nothing wrong with duplexes, triplexes, small apartment buildings. I lived in those too, and so but your question is so right on. The way you get people to come along, and you're never going to get everybody, but the way you get, I think, the majority of people to come along is that you address legitimate concerns in a real way and you include them in the process. Things like, what are we going to do about parking? What are we going to do about infrastructure like water capacity? If your house was built prior to 95, you have a smaller pipe than after 95. We had the most water main breaks ever last winter. What are you going to do about school capacity? Bethesda Elementary was so overcrowded last year, the superintendent took the unprecedented step to allow anyone to leave the school during the middle of the year. Never had happened before. What are you going to do about real transit options? And so people want answers to those questions in a real way, and not to be told, hey, because you're worried about this, something's wrong with you, or you don't want other people in your community. Those housing types are okay, but you got to take people through the process, and that was not done with the attainable housing strategy, and it was not done with some of these other policies. And I think as county executive, I'll have the credibility, having lived in these type of things, and pushed back and making sure it's a good deal to move people in that direction. I think that's what's really required.
Thank you.
Well, I haven't taken a 180 position on housing. My position on housing options has been consistent, and we have included people in the process. When we had the attainable housing strategy, which was based off of 3.5 years earlier, Councilmember Jawando's zoning text amendment, as well as Hans Reamer's proposal on the corridors that hadn't been fully proposed and fleshed out. There was 3.5 years to have those conversations, and those conversations apparently didn't happen. So I'm not sure where the failure was there. But ultimately, the attainable housing recommendations were moved forward. They were brought to the council. I initiated a process as part of that to have 3 sessions, public sessions, to go through those proposals at the county council in the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, where we could ask questions. Then we initiated an unprecedented public outreach effort where we did 5 listening sessions in 5 different parts of the county through the regional service centers and an online option. And we set up a dedicated portal to allow those folks to happen. Now here's the reality. I am all for public input, but it is very challenging to get input from people who don't generally and regularly get involved in the political process. And so there is a balance of unlimited listening sessions until the end of time and making sure that people have an opportunity to be heard and allowing for a veto of new residents in a community. We have faced this issue in local government forever. There is a reckoning that is being dealt with at the state level and at the national level where we're questioning whether we should allow people to say no different type of housing in our neighborhood, where we can have a conversation about we want to be a welcoming place for immigration, but not a welcoming place for housing options and for new residents and new income. And that's not okay. So we have to find that balance. We have to figure it out. We have to work through issues with people. I'm proud of the fact that we did work through many of those issues. We didn't allow it to be by right.
Thank you, Councilmember.
We required a process. We have to continue to have this conversation. I don't think there's a lot of credibility in positions changing overnight based on
Thank you so much. Josh, we're counting on you. You have a lightning round question for them that you can answer in 60 seconds or less?
Oh, wow. Well, this is a political question, but I hope it will be illuminating. Landlords, developers, and other real estate industries are major players in Montgomery County politics. They spread campaign contributions around, create super PACs, and hire powerful lobbyists to sway policy debates. Would you say they have too much influence, too little influence, or just about the right amount of influence? And how would you describe your own relationship with the industry?
I'm going to give you 60 seconds. 60 seconds for that, but maybe we can come back to it. We're going to start with Councilmember Friesen.
I think outside influence has too much influence in politics in general. That is true of all special interests in the county. That's true of all special interests in the country. We have all kinds of different organizations that have done independent expenditures in previous campaigns. I've never had an independent expenditure. I actually think I'm unique up here. I've never had an independent expenditure supporting my campaign directly in any way. But that is really the Citizens United question and issue. It's the dark money in politics that nobody knows where it's coming from, who's funding it, and what their reasoning is for it. We both at times taken traditional financing, which is what system I'm in now, sometimes in public financing at other moments. But I think ultimately, yes, there is too much power for all special interests in politics across the board. That's true at the national level, first and foremost, and it's true at the county level. My personal relationship, I will say I am someone who has deeply disappointed the business community at times and developers and have been yelled at for my positions on things, voting against various legislative proposals, allowing legislative proposals to go through that were opposed. And I've been supported in other ways. But the question is, who has credibility to work with businesses to actually get things done? And I think I have balanced, at times disappointed, and at times been a supporter, and have always been seen as a straight shooter.
Thank you so much.
Somebody who has never swayed on my positions for convenience.
Councilmember Jawando, you can take us to the break.
Sounds good. They have way too much influence. If you just do the math on who gives to local elections, by far the development community gives to local elections. The majority of my colleague up here's money comes from folks directly from the development community or with close ties to the development community. He has never used public financing. I've used it twice. The reason you use it is because every contribution, and we were the fastest to ever qualify under public financing, because with between $5 and $500 from county residents gets matched. Helped work on that law. It's a big, big problem. Special interest money in politics is corrosive, and there's a reason they're spending the money, because they want to have influence. There was $1 million PAC, Progressives for Progress or whatever they named it, that put out a slate of candidates. And to say that I haven't been supported, that PAC supported Councilman Friedson and Councilman Glass and not me. And those voices are going to be very active again in this election. And so I think people need to look at that. Why are people supporting, why are corporate interests at a time when income inequality is raging out of control, why are they supporting certain candidates? I think that's a fair question to ask, and you should follow the money and you should look at it.
Now we're going to get into some questions from the audience and some pre-submitted questions. So look forward to this conversation with you all. We'll keep the same timing. This first question came in a couple different forms, but I'll read one of them. It says the county now has 5 divisions responsible for enforcing different aspects of renters' rights. We've got the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, Code Enforcement, Rent Stabilization Office, the Office of Human Rights, and now Consumer Protection. A lot of folks are finding that their complaints are getting moved from department to department, adding to lots of confusion and obviously frustration. And so wondering what efforts would you make to increase coordination in the executive branch and have sort of a no wrong door approach to handling renter complaints and concerns. And if memory serves, we started with you last time, so we'll start with Councilmember Juando.
Sure. I don't remember, but I'll trust you. Yeah, we actually discussed this recently at the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, which we have served on in both of its iterations for the entire time we've been on the council. It's a big issue, and one of the things I'm most excited about, if I'm so privileged to serve as county executive, is to create more coordination within government and more efficiency within government. When you call 311 or you call DHCA or you send an email to anybody, you should get a no wrong door policy. You should be directed. Everyone should be looking at the same list. Rent stabilization should be talking to landlord tenant and vice versa, and they should know who's helping who so that we can most efficiently help people. There's been progress made. We're not where we need to be. DHCA, I think, has the central hub responsibility there, and to a lesser extent, as you mentioned, human rights, and now the Office of Consumer Protection with a limited authority to on certain types of cases. And I think that's good that they have that authority, but I think DHCA has to play the lead. And there has to be kind of an overarching coordination that needs to happen at the director level. So who we put in, a big quality I'm going to be looking for in my DHCA director is someone who's been able to bring disparate parts of government and systems together towards this same goal. And I think that's going to be really important, who those leaders are. I do think they've made progress. I don't think where we need to be. But when you dial, when you call, when you ask for help, our number one job as local government officials is to answer and to get you a response. And to know what the left hand is doing to the right hand,
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a problem across county government right now. We hear this challenge from every group, whether it's a resident, whether it's a local small business, whether it's a renter. We hear from people all the time. Unfortunately, our offices are playing the role as council members of what the executive branch is really supposed to do, and we see it within county government, different departments not knowing what the other one is doing. As county executive, I want to go back to what Ike Leggett did, and I want to give Matt Losak credit here when he served on the task force to look at renter issues and convene a task force to actually look through and make recommendations to how to actually address this. It's one thing to change the culture, which we absolutely need to do. It's another thing to put the right people in place to coordinate and to be able to work through those issues. But we also need to make sure we're listening to the people who are actually impacted and understand, where are the roadblocks? What are you getting blocked up in, and how do we actually solve them? I think we can recreate a similar version of that, talking specifically about the operational challenges that we face. And I think we can do that across the board with renters, and I think we can do that in other circumstances as well to fix the problems, to solve the problems, because there definitely are issues where we're not picking up the phone, we're not answering, and when we do answer, we're not knowing what the other person on the other end of the hallway is doing or saying, and that's just not acceptable. It doesn't help the people who need it.
Thank you both. Anything additional? Fine. All right, we're moving.
I don't think we're rebutting each other on that one.
That's fair. That's fair. So let's stick with county government operations for a while. We mentioned in the earlier conversation the troubled properties list, and so the county back in 2015 enacted the troubled properties code enforcement program as part of major legislation that the Renters Alliance and others were a part of on renters' rights. Today, there are more than 65 properties listed as troubled. So certainly, you've talked about the ways in which you would sort of get in there in the details of the executive branch and sort of coordinate across the board. You both just talked about that. Are there specific things, though, for code enforcement, which has been like a persistent challenge and bugaboo for so many folks, that you all, from your perspectives, know that you definitely want to do?
Well, we have tried, both of us actually together on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee to really push the executive branch to address the enforcement issues. At one point after the pandemic, we had a situation where there were vacancies in that office where there weren't enough people, and we didn't have enough. And so we've added additional people in enforcement where there has been agreement on, and we've pushed to fill those vacancies and to make sure that the inspections are actually happening. We've heard a lot of excuses from the current county executive of why inspections don't happen, and the reality is when inspections don't happen, that is terrible for residents who are unfortunately living in unsafe and undignified living environments. And it's not good for the businesses either, for the property owners either, because if they have actually done what they're supposed to do and actually have followed up in good faith, they're not able to get off the troubled properties list. So this is a lose-lose for everybody when the executive and the executive branch don't step up and do the work. The council has tried to push as much as we can, but ultimately this is going to be the job of the next county executive to have a department that is responsive to the needs of residents and renters, and even to the needs of property owners to get the properties inspected in a timely manner. That hasn't happened to the extent that it needs to, and it should.
Yeah, the troubled properties, again, I spoke about my personal experience. I've visited so many people and knocked doors that are dealing with this. I'm sure there's people in this room that have dealt with not safe and not habitable rental units. It's not right. It's a core function of county government to address those. We have added staff. We've added resources. The inspections have gone up. I don't know what the number is, but I'm going to get it after this debate. Between when I started in 2018 and now, we're doing thousands and thousands more inspections, which is a good thing. And the troubled properties list, as I mentioned earlier, because we linked rent increases to not being on that list in the rent stabilization law, went down for the first time since the list was in existence, 70%. And that is a huge, huge thing for the people that live in those units. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. But we've made a lot of progress, and you won't have, I will be so focused on this. I have worked with the Renters Alliance and community groups and civic and renter organizations. That's part of it too, is building capacity to organize within tenant associations so you can have voice. So much of this is about having a power and a voice to take the one landlord to the one tenant dynamic off the table, because you need to come together. I will continue to empower those things and make sure that community organizations like the Renters Alliance and others have the ability to help organize, because that's going to be a big part of what we need to do to make sure that no one's living in a troubled property. I'd be the first county executive ever that's actually lived in a troubled property that's on the list today. I understand that in a deep personal way, and it's reprehensible that anyone would live in a place that's not safe, and we got to make sure we make more progress on that.
Thank you both. Earlier in the conversation, we sort of touched on the way that, or you all touched on the way that county government works with nonprofits to extend county services and in the housing sort of in the housing arena especially, and nonprofits like the Renters Alliance, for instance, that partner with the county government to do outreach, et cetera. Can you talk to us about sort of what your philosophy is on that, given the sort of federal situation, the funding situation, right? And the fact that we have not been at a high water mark, right, for funding for our nonprofits to be able to partner with the county government to do these services. And so a lot of folks wondering, as we go deeper into, what is happening at the federal level, what's going to happen locally, how we are going to maintain, sustain that relationship, but also improve it. And so can you talk a little bit about sort of your thinking there as it relates to working with the nonprofit arena and housing, whether it's on not just on sort of the provision of housing, but also organizations like ours that partner as to do outreach and other coordination. Start with Councilmember Jawando.
Sure. Well, just generally about our nonprofits, which make up like 10-11% of our business community, they are vital to everything we do in the county, and we couldn't provide services to residents without them. It's one of the reasons I fought so very hard every year in the budget to make sure that their cost of living adjustments get passed, and we give them that extra bump. Frankly, it doesn't keep up. They're doing the work at a cheaper rate with passion than many government employees, and so we need them, and they're augmenting government service. And I would put groups like that support housing, that organize tenants, that help people with down payment assistance. You know, we had a little mini debate earlier this year about whether to refund groups that actually provide down payment assistance, kind of counseling, and people who want to be new homeowners. And thankfully we got that money and kept it in. There's two main nonprofits that do that. So we have to continue to invest in them, and particularly when we're seeing a disinvestment at the federal level. I think one of the reasons Montgomery County is one of the best places in the country, if not the world, is because we care about each other. And we don't always get it right, but we try. And our nonprofits are a big part of that. So I think as the federal government's stepping back, we're going to need our nonprofits to step up, and we're going to have that conversation about how we do that in tough financial times. But I think the work they do and that you all do is critical.
This is such an important question at a time when the federal government just isn't reliable to fund the services that are needed for the most vulnerable in our community. I was just meeting earlier today with Diego at Identity, and we were talking about this exact question of how county government is going to partner with the nonprofit community to meet the needs that we have that are growing without federal support. We could talk about the 50,000 residents who are at risk of losing their health care, the tens of thousands of residents who are going to go food insecure because of the rollbacks at the federal government. There are just countless examples of a lack of funding and challenge that we are going to face. This has been Montgomery County's secret sauce historically, the partnership between nonprofits and county government. And Will, you've been a leader in so many of those organizations. Unfortunately, I think that partnership has started to fall behind. And the data shows that in terms of the actual amount that we're funding, and the relationships have demonstrated that. In the days when Ike Leggett was county executive, when Chuck Short was at the forefront of these partnerships, it was as strong as it had ever been. And we were moving forward in a way in partnership with our nonprofit community. Now we see the time it takes just for grant funding to go through, where we're asking nonprofits to front money, hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes, for basic government services that we're asking them to provide in a completely unfair way. That partnership needs to be strengthened, and that social safety net cannot be met with county government alone. We need our nonprofit partners, and it's not going to work if we are not providing the necessary level of funding and the relationships and the connections that you need to make it happen. And ultimately, right now, I've seen a deterioration of those partnerships, not a strengthening of them, and we're going to need to do that in the next executive term more than we ever have because of the federal rollbacks and because of the challenges that these nonprofit organizations and service providers are doing.
Appreciate both of them, Fred. Want to circle back to a topic that we touched on at the beginning, just cause, good cause, which you both sort of talked about the ways in which the county council has been on the record in support. As county executive, I assume that both of you would take an active role in going to Annapolis to support good cause, but I would love to hear more about the way that you see your role in Annapolis on this particular issue, and also on other issues of import for the county as it relates to housing, and particularly with the nuance that was brought up this legislative session that we got into a little bit, where the sort of the choice was put on the table, let's say, between having good cause with the caveat, on rent stabilization, what have you. So I'm wondering how, as county executive, you would step into that ongoing conversation, as it is ongoing as we get closer to session. How would you advocate for or not the current model of the good cause legislation? What would you do? Sort of our voice in Annapolis there.
Well, this is a key issue, not just for good cause, but for every issue of what is the credibility of the Montgomery County executive, the chief executive of the largest jurisdiction in the state, and what relationships, what gravitas, what credibility does that person have in Annapolis? We had two previous county executives who had different approaches. Doug Duncan took the bull in the china shop approach. He had the megaphone. He went to Annapolis and people respected him, and he got big things done, like Strathmore Hall and other major things, downtown Silver Spring, you name it. Doug Duncan was able to do that by bringing together relationships that he had in Annapolis. Ike Leggett took a very different approach, a quiet, relationship-based approach where he was able to build relationships, even with the Republican governor, to protect what Montgomery County needed, to ensure that we had a seat at the table, to make sure that the decisions included us. This current county executive has become a persona non grata in Annapolis. He has no ability and no relationships to be able to actually deliver and get things done. It's been a huge problem and a huge challenge for Montgomery County. I'm proud of the fact that I worked in Annapolis. I have deep relationships in Annapolis. I have support of half of the Senate delegation already in this campaign who are supporting us because of the relationships that I've had, because of the work that we've actually done together. That's what the next county executive is going to need. And at a time when we're going to face major policy issues like this, nuanced policy discussions like the one that we're talking about with good cause and vacancy control and other dynamics, and when we're talking about the challenges of a state budget that is going to have to make decisions of where the cuts are and what the pass downs are going to be and what taxes are going to look like, we're going to need a county executive who actually can work with leaders in Annapolis, has the credibility and the relationships to get it done. And I believe I'm uniquely positioned in this race to be that person.
So can I just ask you as a follow-up? Appreciate that. So what would you do specifically on good cause, noting where it was left off in the last session, where the debate's going to pick up?
My position on good cause and on vacancy control has been very clear. I said that I'm not a big fan of vacancy control. I think it protects units and not people. I think it's not the right policy, and I think it causes more problems than it solves. I think it's one of the more challenging aspects of the rent stabilization bill that leads to less housing, which is a problem for me. On good cause, I'd be supportive of that. So ultimately, if there was a way to nuance that, I would be very open to helping to broker that deal. I've had conversations with Janelle Wilkins and others about it, and I think ultimately we can come up with something that can actually move this forward. There's a question of whether or not the state imposes that, whether or not we do that at the local level. There are a lot of conversations that need to happen, but I would take a leadership role in that issue. I've had lots of conversations already, and I think the county executive can play a central role and currently isn't.
Councilman Joando.
Great. So just so everyone knows what vacancy control is, it says that we included it in rent stabilization. It means that you can't increase the rent higher than the allowed percentage, 3% plus inflation capped at 6%, if someone leaves that unit and a new person comes in. The reason being, when you don't have good cause or anything else, a lease could be ended with the purpose of raising the rent on that unit, right? And so that's why it's important to tie it to the unit and not just the person, because that's, unless there are exceptions, if there's a rehabilitation or something needs to be done, you can have exceptions. The reason that I did work behind the scenes to not agree to that quote unquote compromise in Annapolis is because it's a false choice, right? You need both things to provide full protection. People don't need to be kicked out. Their leases don't need to be ended for arbitrary reasons. And you need to have vacancy control so there's not an incentive to do that. And that continues to be my position. I think there were folks that were lobbying from the industry to try to attack and find a loophole into rent stabilization and to get rid of vacancy control that way and discourage other jurisdictions from doing it. And I don't think that's the way forward. All good cause, again, says is that you can't kick people out unless you can't terminate their lease or fail to renew their lease unless there's really good reasons, like they haven't been paying their bills or they've damage the property, et cetera. And I think that's a basic thing. You shouldn't be able to do that anyway. You shouldn't have to trade that for your rent being able to go up on a unit. So I think that's a big distinction here too. I'm not for that. And I actually worked really hard to make sure that that compromise didn't go forward, because I think we want to keep Montgomery County's rent stabilization, including vacancy control, in place. We don't want to weaken or water our bill and have to choose one or the other when you need both things.
So, and I'll come, definitely, Councilmember Friesen, just a follow-up to that sort of, and I hear you, how would you then sort of approach Annapolis differently, similarly?
Sure.
What would you do?
Yeah, thank you. So I don't think we have to make that choice. A lot of times in Annapolis, it takes years to pass something, right? And you got to come back, and you got to compromise, and you got to talk to people. Those conversations are ongoing, and I think we can get there. There's also elections coming up, right? We're here talking about an election. There'll be some changes in Annapolis too, and I think once people see, here's the thing with vacancies. Vacancies are actually very high in rental properties right now, and people keep units open in part because of their profit and bottom line. Then we're suing RealPage, the state of Maryland, along with others, because there's collusion on keeping rents high. So this idea that you don't need these protections is just a falsity. And we're one of 12 states, along with the District of Columbia, suing an antitrust violation because folks are sending their rental information to this company and they're saying you should charge this much, and it's falsely inflating prices. That's also happening in other states with grocery prices, right? Corporate collusion to increase prices. And so we have to push against that. And you don't need to raise a unit higher than 6% a year, whether it's vacant or not. And you also shouldn't kick people out unless you have cause to do it. So I think that is a strong message. And again, organizing tenants and renters around the state to talk to legislators in Annapolis, talking behind the scenes. I don't think we have to make that trade-off. I think we can get a clean bill that gives local jurisdictions the authority to do good cause. You don't have to do it, but gives us the authority in an enabling way. I think we can get there. We've made progress. We're close. We got close last year. This kind of compromise came in, quote unquote, at the last minute. I think we can get a clean bill.
Councilmember Friesen, I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, just to clarify, because I just think it's disingenuous to suggest that this was a random loophole that's being found. In the discussion on rent stabilization, the fact that we do not have just cause, good cause eviction was the reason why colleagues on the council cited at the dais for why they thought that vacancy control was important. So that's where it got connected. That's why it was discussed in the way that it was. So it's totally fine for us to have disagreements on this. I don't believe that a unit should be protected. I think that if we're going to do protections, it should be focused on tenants, not on inanimate objects. That's a legitimate policy disagreement that we have, but I don't think it's fair to suggest that this came out of nowhere. This was part of the discussion. It was literally there. You can watch the tape. You can rewind it and look at it. We should be able to discuss that and figure it out and decide whether or not it makes sense. The challenge with vacancy control, from my perspective, is that it incentivizes increases while people are in the unit, and it also makes it unlikely that you could lower the rent. Because, for instance, during COVID, rents went down because of a number of different dynamics. And once the rent goes down, it's hard to catch back up if you're in vacancy control, because it's not like you can reset it to what is a fair market rent and then have catch-ups when a new unit holder comes in. So there are challenges when we step into these types of transactions, particularly when we're helping people who don't necessarily need the help. There are plenty of people who need help. We should target and focus our support to them. I'm not sure I'm keen on providing help and support and significant protections for people who are paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 in rent for the most expensive units by their choice. That's not what I would prefer to focus on.
You want to follow up?
Yeah. Gouging is wrong no matter who you're doing it to. And you tell the family that has 2 kids that's living in an apartment that you're okay with their rent going up a couple $1,000s. I don't think that's helping them. And also the administrability of distinguishing between certain renters would be very, very difficult and hard to implement as a practical matter. I'm hoping I heard here that we can amend the vacancy control law to say that you can lower rents, I'd be for that. I'm not sure if there's a restriction, but if there was, if you want to reset and go lower, that's no problem. The whole point of it is that you can't go above the rate if someone moves out of a unit. So because you create an incentive to kick people out of units. That's the problem. And again, as I mentioned, you have vacancies that are high right now. People are holding units vacant when people need housing because of the profit margins. And so that's something we got to dig into. Then they're inflating prices. Just think about the system we're dealing with here. And then you say we don't need to put in controls on that. That's just doesn't pass the reality common sense test. Those two things can't exist and be happening, which they are, documented fact. And you don't have any sort of protection for renters. And again, these are people's homes. And I'm going to side on the side of people's homes every day of the week.
Thank you both. We had a number, I will call them, of questions from tenants complaining about landlords, complaining about their landlords not understanding county rules and procedures, questions about best practices, and we've had a discussion for quite a while, I think, in the county about ways to get property owners, landlords, to make sure that not just that they're up on sort of best industry practices or best practices for our community, but also that they sort of fundamentally understand landlord-tenant law. So wondering your views on whether or not the county should take action to ensure that property managers, owners, landlords are certified as a requirement of their licensure to operate here. I honestly cannot remember who I started with the last time.
I think I'm first. Yeah. Yes, this is something that we've talked about for years. I do think it makes sense. While we have a handbook for landlords in the county, I do think it makes sense to have additional training and certification and figuring out a way for their benefit, right? Like things like how to stay off the troubled properties list, which is not good for you and it's not good for tenants. How to properly raise your rent under the rent stabilization law, and legally do that. How to apply for an exemption or how to bank your rent. I think there's benefit on both sides, big time, when you have more people informed. And so I don't see it as a punitive thing. I see it as a helpful thing. And I do think it would make sense to build out a certification process. It's particularly for small landlords. Like the big landlords, they can probably do it on Zoom and they know they know the rules. They have lawyers and attorneys. But for small landlords, for single family homeowners that are renting their properties, it also would encourage, give them information at the front end about how to do it the right way. And I think that's something that we should do. And I see it as a benefit on both sides.
I'd be open to the conversation. I think it depends on what that certification looks like and how high the burden is, particularly for a small landlord. There are a lot of older adults that this is their primary source of income. They still rent out their small property that they originally purchased with their spouse 30, 40 years ago. And, creating a process that is overly cumbersome for them is something that would be concerning for me. Figuring out a way to nuance that so that we have the right information and the right understanding so that we can make sure that the rules are being followed, that the information is going out to tenants in an appropriate way makes sense. I think sometimes in this conversation we don't properly target to the places where they're needed the most and don't have an understanding of what is a small landlord who has one property that they lease out. These are not the big bad landlords that are being vilified every day by people in county government. But sometimes they're the ones that are causing some of the challenges because they don't know the rules. And so how do we figure that out? How do we work through it? I'd be open to having that conversation. We have to make sure it doesn't overly create more problems than it solves.
Appreciate that. We had a question from a county renters, a federal employee. We've spoken a bit about not just the activity in Washington, but we are currently in a government shutdown where lots of county residents or federal employees are facing serious financial challenges. So the question that came in was, as county executive, sort of are there any policies in your mind that you would think to put forward that would particularly help renters who are federal employees, given, who knows where, obviously we have 9 months until the next election, and God willing, the government is not shut down for 9 months. But I think that you get the general gist of the question. Folks who are saying, my livelihood is up and down depending on the nature of what I see on TV, and I've got my bills to pay. So, sort of how is the county going to help me? And I analogize it to certainly the ways in which the county decided to interdict and intervene during COVID, right? Which was a huge emergency, not something that you all had ever thought that you needed to do. But so I'm wondering, both in relation to this specific question, but also as you look at the landscape of our neighbors, down 495, what are things that you think about as the next county executive that you might want to put on the table for folks as it relates to the housing arena?
This I think it's me.
Yes.
This is such a big issue.
Thank you all for keeping up.
There are so many of our friends and neighbors and our loved ones who are without work right now, who don't know when their next paycheck is going to come, and some of them don't know if their next paycheck is ever coming. When we're talking about a workforce where 1/3 of our workforce in Montgomery County are federal workers or federal contractors. I mean, the impact here is just absolutely staggering. Rental assistance and significantly increasing that like we did during COVID is something that I would love to do, and something that I think Councilmember Joanno and I agree on wholeheartedly. The challenge is during COVID, we had a pandemic, not man-made, not happening from people within our own leadership in our own country, and we had the full-throated support of the federal government. Those hundreds of millions of dollars came directly from the federal government. So we faced a crisis and we had a federal partner. Now, the call's coming from inside the House. The crisis is being caused by the federal government. It's being created by the people we relied on before to help us and to support us. So now our only option really is to help ourselves. And when I was council president, at the end of my term was the beginning of the new administration. When the Trump administration took office, there was a lot of concern and uncertainty. And so we created a United in Service and Support effort where we brought all of our service providers, our nonprofit providers, together for residents. We created bus access on Sunday in the executive office building and brought everybody together to be able to provide those additional supports and services. That led ultimately to an effort by the current council president, Kate Stewart, under the same theme, to do thematic webinars to help residents, working together with our federal delegation and working with our service providers. We're going to have to fix the partnership with the nonprofits. In order to address this issue, we're going to have to figure out a way to provide additional rental assistance and additional support. We're going to have to provide new pathways to create opportunities for job opportunities. We did put $700,000 in the budget for a new program through WorkSource to support federal workers. The challenge with that is it's not nearly enough, and it doesn't really directly support all of the folks with the unique challenges that we face. And the last piece is we're going to have to use this crisis as an opportunity to rebuild a county economy outside of the over-reliance on the federal government. We have to have a private sector economy so that those from outside our borders don't have this level of stranglehold over the economic dynamics and conditions within our county. We have relied on the federal government as a reliable partner forever, since at least post-World War II. That reliability doesn't exist anymore. And we've got to rely on ourselves, and we're only going to be able to do that if we work together.
Thank you. Yes, it's really disheartening that the government's shut down right now. We have so many people furloughed. We've had over 5,000 fired since January. Of the 70,000 federal workers, we have the highest percentage of any county in the country. We're 3,500 counties, and we're number one with the most percentage of federal workers, that's including contractors. And it's very disheartening. I'm just today, or tomorrow actually, or this week, the bill that I passed and all my colleagues supported to give a hiring preference to fired federal workers, the regulations go into effect on Friday. So that's a very tangible thing. Look, we've got 10,000 total positions any given point. There's several hundred that are open. It will help some people. It's obviously not going to solve the problem, but we're going to have to take a really, really multi-pronged approach to plug holes, which is really all we can do. We need to have the federal government as a partner. So, but that doesn't mean we should just throw our hands up and do nothing. We should do something. That's a concrete step. The United in Service webinars that we kicked off, the funding for Worksource Montgomery, we're going to have ribbon cutting on later this week on the Federal Resource Hub for these workers, consolidating all the resources that are available, making it easy for them to know how to get unemployment and rental assistance, even if it's temporary and not enough money, all those things, putting that all in one place, having job fairs, et cetera. We're going to have to do that. But then we're going to have a really difficult conversation too, because the worst parts of the big ugly bill have not kicked in yet. They delayed them to after the election. Our health director told us in response to a question I asked that 50,000 folks could lose Medicaid in Montgomery County, in a county of 1.1 million. That's devastating. Temporary food assistance, SNAP food assistance, early childhood education programs, Head Start, all that being cut, and much of that is delayed. And so, and where did the money go? The money went to give the richest among us tax breaks. And we are uniquely, this has never happened before. Montgomery County has more millionaires. We have 1 in 10 Marylanders are millionaires. Montgomery County is somewhere between almost 2 in 10. And so we have to ask ourselves, the adjusted gross income, if you make $1 million, you're going to get a $70,000 tax cut because of someone lost Medicaid. And some of our residents are going to do really, really well. And I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we support our residents at a time when this income inequality, the largest transfer of wealth from the lowest income to the highest income, has ever happened? And I think we need to raise the income tax on our highest earners. To do that, we have small authority to do that. I think that'll help us plug some holes. But we're going to need to look at ways to support each other. And we got to grow our economy, but we also have to look at tax policy at a time when you have this massive transfer of wealth in the wrong direction. I think that's something I'm going to be pushing for as well.
Appreciate that from both of you. Batten cleanup here, so there's just a couple things that I want to come back to before we get to closing. We've talked a bit early, certainly, about education and its impact on housing, and we know over more than half the county budget goes to supporting, give or take, a lot of the county budget goes to supporting MCPS, which I appreciate as a parent of an MCPS student and a future one. But we also know that the impact that housing instability, poor housing quality has on student outcomes and success. And so a couple questions about this, the interplay between education and housing. As county executive, what would you do as a leader of county government to work with MCPS, work with our council colleagues, to get in the middle of that, right? To what would you do to help lead on supporting MCPS and support student success, academic success, and how would you bring housing into that conversation? Because it is a conversation that is divorced too often, but you look at the numbers and you can see the trends, right? So
I think I'm first. Yeah, that's a huge question. I think it's why I got into public service. I've worked at the U.S. Department of Education. I was counsel on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, and chair of the Education Committee on the council now. And it is the question of our time. And the way to stay economically competitive, to give people an opportunity to move up the economic ladder, you have to invest in education at all levels, from birth through college and career. And we can't go in the wrong direction. I have fought really hard over the last 2 years to get as much funding to MCPS as it can, and held them accountable with over 100 sessions in the Education and Culture Committee to make sure that they're using the money appropriately, which we need to do as well. But you can't do more with less. And numbers of almost half of our students are in poverty. We have astronomical rates of students with special needs, with IEPs, and students that speak English as a second language. And when all those kids can learn, but they need supports. And we have to provide those supports. That's why we added 600 special educators. We supported the school system. That was a big fight. And there were differences here. where my two colleagues running for the county executive spot, voted to put $70 million to MCPS on the chopping block. I voted against that. I think that's a big deal. We cannot disinvest. Our schools still haven't recovered per pupil since the recession in 2008 and 9. And we have to continue to have that number go up. And so connection to housing, it's critical. If you ask a teacher what's one of the biggest things they're concerned about, is student mobility. A student not showing up one day, and student attendance. And a lot of times that happens because of lack of access to stable housing. So they're interconnected. And so that's why you need robust supports like rent stabilization and rental assistance, and you need supports for wraparound services at the schools, either provided by HHS or nonprofits or the school systems themselves, like mental health, food resources, supports, et cetera. And we have to provide that because that's how you build a strong community.
Appreciate that. Councilman Friesen.
Well, first of all, this is a really important question. It's also why I got into this. You can't talk about the issues that we face unless you're talking about housing and unless you're talking about education. It is about the now and it is about the future. It is the whole game. It is the whole conversation. It's why I think we do need more housing options for more people. We need more housing units. That's part of the way in which you get the type of integrated mixed income communities. That's why I fought so hard for the mixed income communities that I have throughout the county. It's the only way you're going to solve the housing aspect and the challenges in schools in that regard. You give more options to more people. You provide support for those who need it. You make sure that you help residents and families be able to access different parts of our county in a way that they haven't been able to for decades. On the education front, I'm proud of the fact that when I was council president, we, for the first time ever, added accountability language into the budget, setting an expectation that we're not just going to give more money, we're going to set expectations that we want you to meet. I'm proud of the fact that one of my first bills as a new council member was the Office of Inspector General, and strengthening that office and subsequently providing funding to implement that bill and that approach. And now we have a dedicated division within the Office of Inspector General because of that legislation, because of that work, because of that focus. And we just had an audit hearing today that both of us sat in on to provide accountability to MCPS at a level that it wasn't happening before, where we saw that there were not proper protocols with Chromebooks. Prior to that, the last session that we had, we saw that there weren't proper procedures for background checks to keep our students and our staff members and our families safe. We can balance these two things, but we need to both push for accountability and hold them to it, and provide the resources that are needed and be a partner with the Board of Education and with the school board. I think the blank check approach is not going to solve the problem of any amount of money you ask for without any level of accountability to come with it is just not going to solve the problem. It is not just a funding issue, it's an outcomes issue. And the people who are hurt by bad outcomes are the most vulnerable kids. That is absolutely accurate, and it needs to change. And I'll just note, the $70 million that keeps being repeated is a disingenuous suggestion as well. The reality is this. We were having a debate about how much above $200 million above last year's funding we were going to provide to MCPS. And the question was whether or not we should tranche the money based on a finite amount of resources to balance it with other needs and how much we should go. That's the vote that we took.
We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry, Councilmember Friesen. I want to thank you both for participating in a really robust conversation. Our audience has been really well behaved, but can we give it up for these two candidates? Thank them very much. I want to likewise thank our audience that's joined us on County Cable and online. The Renters Alliance and MCM would like to thank you all again for coming out to share your views on these really critical topics. As nonprofits, we just remind you that we do not support or oppose any candidate for public office or political party. Tonight's presentation is merely for education, and we hope that you were as informed as I was. However, we do encourage everyone to be an active citizen and to vote. So thank you all in the studio, all that joined us online. Have a good night.